and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris, I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I want to tackle a topic that resonates with a lot of us inside of the BDSM community. Today, I want to talk about the difference between ourselves and identity, especially when in the context of BDSM, and how we can sometimes find ourselves getting lost in the roles that we play. This really is an essential subject because our roles as dominants, submissives, or switches are integral to our BDSM experience, but they should never really completely overshadow our core selves. Understanding the distinction between our true self and the identities we adopt in BDSM is really crucial for maintaining a balanced, healthy lifestyle. Now, we all know it's easy to become so immersed in our roles that we lose sight of who we are outside of the dungeon or even the playroom. This can lead to a range of issues from feeling disconnected from our non-BDSM lives to experiencing burnout or even emotional distress. Throughout today's episode, I want to explore what it means to get lost in our roles, how this affects our mental and emotional well-being, and practical steps that we can take to ensure that we're keeping healthy balance between our BDSM identities and our core selves. I am also going to dive into a couple of real-life examples of some people that I've been working with or have shared their stories with me, and use these insights to help illustrate the concepts of what I mean by getting lost between ourselves and our BDSM identities. First, I think it's really crucial here we understand what self versus identity actually means. First up, the concept of self, or of the self. In psychological terms, the self is our core being. It's who we are at our deepest level. It's shaped by our experiences, values, beliefs, the essence really of our personality. You can think of the self as a constant and never-changing equation of life. It's part of us that remains stable even as we grow and change over time. Now, here's the other side of that. Let's talk about identity. Identity is more fluid and encompasses various forms of roles we play, the labels we adopt, and how we present ourselves to the world. Identity can be influenced by external factors like society, culture, and our interactions with others. Now, within the BDSM community, our identities might include being a dominant or a submissive, a switch, a bottom, and so forth, or any other role that really does resonate with us. In BDSM, these roles are more than just labels, though, for us. They're dynamic parts of our identity that we actively engage with. For example, being a dominant might involve embodying traits such as leadership, control, responsibility. The essence of power. Being a submissive might include embracing vulnerability, trust, and service. A switch might fluidly navigate between these roles, experiencing a broad spectrum of behaviors and emotions. The psychological aspects here of these roles are deeply significant. Each role allows us to explore different facets of our own identity, often revealing parts of ourselves we might not otherwise encounter. For instance, a naturally reserved person might find liberation in the assertiveness of a dominant role, while someone who's typically in control might discover profound relief and fulfillment inside of the submission. However, it's really crucial to understand that these roles are parts of our identity, not the entirety of our being. Now, this distinction is vital to maintaining a healthy balance inside of our life. When we over-identify with our BDSM roles, we risk losing sight of our core self. This can lead to an enmeshment where our sense of self, our sense of self-worth, and our identity becomes overly dependent on our role within the BDSM dynamics. To further explain this through some psychological insights, if you will, I want to touch on some of the psychological theories here related to identity formation and role-playing. One of the more famous psychologists throughout history, Carl Jung, his concept of the persona and the shadow can be particularly enlightening here. That really does expand our roles inside of the BDSM world. The persona is the mask that we present to the world, and it's often shaped by societal expectations and roles. The shadow, on the other hand, consists of the parts of ourselves we hide or suppress. Now, in the lifestyle, our roles can sometimes become like the persona, an external manifestation of certain traits. While these roles allow us to explore and express different aspects of our personality, it is essential to integrate them with our core self rather than letting them overshadow it. This integration helps prevent the persona from becoming a rigid identity that stifles our overall growth. Now, another relevant theory here is something that I came across recently by Eric Erickson and his stages of psychosocial development, particularly the stage of identity versus role confusion, which typically occurs during adolescence but can be revisited throughout one's life. This stage often involves exploring different identities and integrating them into a cohesive self concept, if you will. And in the lifestyle context, this means finding a balance where our roles are complementary rather than conflict with our core self. Now, if we understand these psychological insights, it does allow us to recognize the importance of maintaining a fluid relationship between ourself and our BDSM identity. It's about embracing the richness of our roles while staying grounded in who we truly are. This balance allows us to enjoy the depth and intensity of our BDSM experiences without losing sight of the unique individuals we are at our core. By keeping these concepts in mind, we navigate our BDSM journey with a greater self-awareness and resilience, ensuring that our roles enhance rather than detract from our overall well-being. But sometimes we do get lost inside of these roles, and I want to kind of explore that here next. Now, I want you to imagine someone who's embraced the role of a dominant, for example, so fully that it begins to overshadow every aspect of their life. They might start to feel that their worth and their identity are entirely tied to their ability to be in control and to be authoritative. This can lead to a loss of touch with their own needs, desires, boundaries outside of the BDSM context. Now, over time, they might even neglect self-care. They might neglect their personal relationships. They might neglect their family or other interests that were once really important to them. Now, conversely, on the other side, a submissive who deeply immerses themselves in the role might find it challenging to assert their needs and boundaries outside of scenes. They might become so accustomed to yielding control that they struggle with decision making or self advocacy in their everyday lives. And this is more common than people think. This can lead to feelings of helplessness or resentment as their sense of identity becomes narrowly defined by their submissiveness. Now, there are some potential dangers of over-identification. Now, to understand this, over-identifying within a BDSM role does and can create several dangers. One significant risk is losing touch with one's own needs, their boundaries. When we become too engrossed in our roles, we might push ourselves beyond our limits to fulfill what we perceive as role expectations here. This can result in emotional and psychological burnout, and it impacts our mental health and our overall well-being. Another danger here is neglecting our non-BDSM aspects of life. Our roles can become so all-consuming, they leave little room for anything else, or even relationships, or our personal growth, our educational pursuits, maybe even our jobs. This imbalance can create a skewed sense of identity, where we feel lost or empty when we're not actively engaged with our BDSM dynamic. Role enmeshment occurs when individuals start to see their BDSM role as their entire identity. This can lead to various issues, including difficulties in separating scene dynamics from our real life. And maybe one way to explain this a bit better, a dominant might struggle to switch off their authoritative persona, and it can cause friction in personal relationships where mutual decision-making and vulnerability can be and are very essential. A submissive might find it hard to transition out of their differential role, and it affects their ability to engage as an equal partner in other areas of their life. Now, I want to talk about a couple of the people that I've been working with, or a couple of the examples when I started looking into this subject, and some people I had a chance to talk with and actually reached out to me discussing this kind of important subject. First, I want to talk about Sarah. Sarah identifies as a submissive, and she loves the feeling of surrender and trust inside of her dynamic. However, Sarah notices that she starts to defer to her dominant partner in all aspects of their life together, even outside of their scenes. This poses a problem for Sarah. She stops expressing her opinions. She avoids making any and all decisions, and she really does begin to feel invisible in their relationship. She's getting lost inside of it, and she's struggling to find her way out. Now, over time, Sarah has realized that she's lost touch with her sense of self, and she's struggling with feelings of resentment and low self esteem. And this poses a major problem in moving forward through the rest of her life. She's now actively working not only with her partner to regain her own self and set better boundaries and healthier limitations for herself and her dynamic, but she's on the upswing. She's now starting to re-engage more so with the outside world and is now more productive at work. She's starting to understand that self-value and put in positive and healthy boundaries that are setting forth for her moving forward. Now, in my next example here, I want to talk about Paul. Now, Paul identifies as a dominant. He thrives on a lot of control and responsibility that comes with his role. But Paul starts to bring his controlling attitude towards work and some of his friendships that lie outside of that sphere. And this is problematic because it wasn't welcomed here. It wasn't agreed upon. And a lot of people aren't accepting of it. His colleagues and his friends began to distance themselves. They felt uncomfortable with his domineering behavior. They didn't like his condescending attitude or his beliefs or that air that Paul walked around kind of feeling a little bit superior. However, Paul then starts to feel isolated and confused, and his dominant identity, which once brought him a lot of confidence, now seems to be causing problems in his non-BDSM life. So he's having a problem really switching this off. So in working with Paul, what we've started to understand is the sense of fantasy and reality. How do we break free of these roles? How do we separate ourselves? And how do we learn to shut them off? We've learned to maybe put these into an object so we understand that when we're in this role, this is the object that we're holding on to. Maybe when we're out at a dungeon or we're in a scene with our submissive. And then when that object or item is put away, we're no longer in that role. This allows Paul to regain a sense of himself and a sense of where the separation needs to occur between the lifestyle and the real world. This has been, thus far, an effective strategy in working with him. I did have somebody else reach out to me, and it was really quite an interesting case because this was more of someone who sits in the switch world that doesn't, so when they do switch, though, identifies more as a bottom-ended switch and a top-ended dominant. So it's a dominant side persona, but more, instead of a submissive role, as more of a bottom role. And if you're kind of confused in that terminology, bottoms are more in it for going through the motions and going through the scene, and then that's it. That's it. They're done for them. But let's talk a little bit about Hans here. Hans has always felt that their life, they've identified as a switch. But he found it hard to maintain a balance, especially during really stressful periods in his life. Hans clinged to his submissive side or his bottom side, using it as an escape from his pressures, but this then led Hans to neglecting his responsibilities and feeling guilty and overwhelmed when reality began to catch up to him. Now, the problem for Hans here was starting to understand is how do we cope and deal with our responsibilities in the real world and learn to navigate those stressors without regressing into something where we can either domineer over them or relinquish that power. Well, first, when I started speaking with Hans and trying to understand his side and doing some consulting with him and his therapist, it was more about understanding where was the connect and what was the trigger. Why were these stressful periods so heightened that Hans felt he could no longer maintain control over the reality portion of his life and then regressed into a more of a bottom or a submissive type of withdrawal to confront and deal with these stressors. So it's really kind of unpacking and understanding this and what's been the lead up to even understanding family dynamics and relationship dynamics. But each one of these examples highlights the importance of kind of maintaining that balance between our BDSM life and our overall sense of self. And it is crucial to regularly check in with ourselves. It's not just about checking in with our partners. This is one thing I've talked to a lot of when I'm working with people. I'm always asking, do you check in with yourself? Do you asking if you're okay? And I think people believe this approach to be strange, like we're talking with ourselves and we're answering conversations with ourselves, but it's about judging our own capacity. Am I in a good place? Am I struggling? We ask these questions of ourselves all the time, but I think when it comes to separation between our fantasy world and our reality, or in this case, the differentiation of ourself and our identity, we're not doing it enough. A while ago, and why I love capacity so much, when I sat down and I spoke with Miss Kitten and she was talking about capacity working with people during needle play, what I found really enjoyable about that conversation was it was a constant check-in, days leading up to the scene, like a week before the scene, a couple of days before the scene, day of the scene, and then even after the scene. We're judging somebody's capacity because it allows us to reflect on our experiences, to reflect on our roles, and engage rather than detract from our lives. And it is okay to say, hey, I'm considering doing a scene this weekend with my partner. I've had a really rough week. Am I up to it? This is a question that sometimes I will ask myself or I ask people that I'm working with. But if I know I'm going to get into a heavy scene in a couple of months and I'm building something up that I'm probably looking forward to, I know I've got enough time to put myself in the right mindset. But maybe if it's, I've been going to the dungeon a lot lately, playing or scening a lot lately, maybe, this upcoming weekend I've had a really hard week at work. I'm tired. I haven't been sleeping well. Maybe I'm not eating well or haven't hit the gym enough. Oh, God, the weather is crappy outside. I might ask myself, so it's a Monday. The week started out bad. It's midweek now. It's Wednesday. I haven't been sleeping too well. Friday night's coming up. I'm hitting Thursday and I'm doing my final check-in. I'm seeing where my capacity is at. My physical side, I'm tired. I'm cranky a little bit. Haven't been sleeping good. Mentally, I'm a little foggy. I'm, struggling, concentrating on a couple of tasks. And emotionally, I feel a little bit drained. I'm not at probably 100% to be going into this thing. I need to recognize this, talk to myself about it, and it's okay. Our partner should then we should be able to turn to our partner and say, listen, I'm not there for the scene this week. I apologize, but the reality is I need to be able to find a balance for myself. And that's kind of a great part that leads into where I want to kind of wind this down. And this is about balancing our BDSM roles with our core self and how crucial this is for a healthy and really fulfilling experience within the lifestyle. So I want to give you a couple of strategies to help you maintain that balance and to ensure that your BDSM identity is a complement rather than overshadows who you are. So first, I just talked about self-awareness and regular self-reflection. And this is a first step in maintaining that balance to developing our self-awareness. It involves being in tune with your emotions, your needs, your boundaries, your physical health, both within and outside of your dynamic. And you should regularly do a self-reflection. And this helps you stay connected to your core and helps you recognize when your role might be starting to overshadow other aspects of your life. Another thing here is consider setting time aside each week to reflect on how you're feeling, like I was talking about before. Maybe every Wednesday, if I know I'm in a scene regularly on Fridays and Saturdays, maybe every Wednesday I'm looking at how is my role or my thoughts impacting my overall well-being. A couple of questions I might consider is, how do I feel when I'm not engaged in my BDSM role? Am I neglecting any personal or professional responsibilities because of my involvement in the lifestyle? Are there any areas of my life where I feel unfulfilled or even out of balance. Maybe I haven't seen my family in a couple of months and I'm really kind of missing them. And it's not that we don't love the lifestyle, but we also need to reconnect. We need to be able to recharge those batteries outside of the lifestyle. The second one here is quite clear. It's about setting boundaries. And I've talked before how essential it is to ensure that our role complements rather than dominates our life. And this means understanding and communicating our limits both in scenes and everyday life. And it's really important to set boundaries that protect your time and energy and our emotional well-being. And before I get into some examples here, I really do want to kind of hint at something. I kind of get asked how often I believe people live 24/7. I believe that number is quite small globally. If we were to take a very round number and say there's 10 million active people globally inside of the lifestyle, I'm not talking about discussing it or thinking about kink or just entering kink. That's actually not active participation. And I'm sorry, it's not about offending anyone. I'm talking you've been a part of the scene, you're well-versed, you have some education, maybe some scenes behind you, you attend classes, you're really living into the role experiences, right? That's what I'm talking about here. And of that 10 million, I'm going to say that people who do activities more than once a month out of that 10 million is probably at least 50%. So 50% of that 10 million globally are going to more than one class per month. They might be engaging more online, doing events online. You can start to reduce that number down. And it's not hard to really see. Why? Because finances are involved. Even if you're teaching, some of these people, that's great. You own a shop or a dungeon. But that number is so small around the world. And I'm talking about living a 24/7 dynamic. I'm not talking about if you're in the profession of BDSM. I'm going to say that number starts getting even smaller. But 24/7 dynamics, ultimately, I don't know. I can't imagine more than 10 to maybe 30,000 people globally are in hardcore 24/7 dynamics where they're going through some proper things. They're negotiated their dynamic, and that's who they've become. I can't imagine anymore because the extreme amount of work that it takes that is involved in that, from the macro management and micromanagement of the dominant side to everything that the submissive/slave is probably going to give up. It's not always cracked up to be what I think everybody believes it is. I think there's a lot more fantasy instead of reality involved with it. So I really think that global number each year is no more than between 10 and 30,000. I don't know. I don't have anything to statistically back that up. I'm just going on 25 plus years worth of experience and people I've spoken to all over the world. I've played all over the United States. I've done scenes in the UK, Oz, the Far East, Singapore, and a couple of other places around the world. Let me tell you, while there's a love and deep connection to this lifestyle, I don't see a lot of people living it outside of the weekends when they do it. And that's just because, they've got to work. They've got to take care of a house, so they have a family. I don't want to digress too much on this point, but I just, I get that question a lot. That's what I think. Don't have anything to back it up. It's more of an opinion based than factually based, so it's quite subjective. But, if you disagree, you can let me know. Now, the next part I want to get to is ensuring our role integration here. And it's quite beneficial that you do integrate your role with your overall sense of self rather than letting it define who you are completely. And this does mean acknowledging your role as part of your identity rather than your entire identity. And if you engage in these activities and relationships outside of the lifestyle that reinforce your self-worth and your personal growth, you then don't get lost in the role that you've chosen. Right? And here's some practical advice. If you're really worried about a lot of things, journal your experiences, write them down so you can come back later on and reflect. I tell you what, I did that for the first couple of years. It was really wild to see the things I've been a part of and how I felt and what it meant to me. Create a self-care plan. Develop something that's going to include activities and practices that nurture your core self. That could be anything from exercise to meditation to taking a trip, anything that's self-care. And again, I want to state and reemphasize, schedule a regular check-in with yourself. Even a trusted friend or a partner or family member, if you've been that open with them. All of these things are really, really important. Now, so what are some of these real-life applications here, and any final tips I have for you all? Now, if we're going to balance our identity with our core self, it's really important not just to maintain that harmony in our roles, but overall our emotional, mental, and physical well-being. And if we're going to dive into some of these practical steps so you can assess where you're at and realign this balance, you need to make sure that you're going to be focused on doing this for your overall sense of self. So first, you have to assess your current balance, and you have to understand where you stand within your identity inside of the community, which does involve more than just a superficial glance at your daily activities. It does require a lot more introspection on how your role affects your broader sense of self. And you need to start by reflecting on your experiences and feelings. You need to ask yourself, how does engaging maybe inside of the lifestyle affect my mood and self-perception? Do I feel any disconnect between who I am inside of my BDSM role and who I am inside of my life? And maybe, I don't know, are there any other aspects of my life that seem to suffer or flourish because of my involvement inside of the lifestyle? This introspection here aligns with psychological theories of self-concept and identity. And if your self-concept is how you perceive yourself, which can be influenced by various roles that you occupy, then you need to understand that if your BDSM life and the identity that you have there starts to overshadow your core identity, it's going to create some internal conflicts and even possibly cognitive dissonance. And if you recognize these conflicts, you can help understand whether your role is aligning with or diverging from your true self. And let's be quite honest here, you need to have some sort of practical goal. So once you've kind of assessed your current life and your balance and where you're sitting, you need to put in place some concrete goals. And these goals need to aim to harmonize your role inside of a lifestyle with your overall identity. For example, if you want to find your role that's causing you stress or affecting your relationships, set an objective to address these issues. This can be anything from creating a boundary to separating certain activities from other areas of your life and scheduling regular time for self-care or personal interests. And the reason why I talk about self-care so much, even after I work with somebody in a therapy session, I tell, and there's any of my clients can attest to this, I always tell them, after we are done, for the next hour, go do whatever it is that's you time. What does your you time look like? Playing video games, baking, take a shower, make dinner, make breakfast. You want to go work on your car, cut the grass. I don't care what it is, but go and do some me time, at least for an hour. You're going to have all that time. It's not going to go anywhere when we're thinking about, after we're done what we're talking about inside of our session. And it's the same here. Figure out what some me time looks like and engage in it. It's such a great way to ground yourself and to recharge a little bit of your battery. Now, when I talk about things like setting goals, it can be framed through the lens of psychological theory, such as the concept of self-regulation. And that does really involve managing your behaviors and your emotions to achieve your long-term desires and objectives. If you set something that's clear and manageable, you exercise your self-regulation so you ensure that your BDSM lifestyle role enhances rather than dominates your life. And I've talked a lot about these check-ins, but there's a reason why we do this, and there's a reason for all of this self-care because of how important it is. But one final thing I want to kind of chuck in there for you is maybe look to getting feedback from some trusted individuals, and this can provide you some valuable insights into how well you're actually balancing your BDSM role with other aspects of your life, especially if they're friends. Maybe they know you're in the lifestyle or not, but these conversations can help you gain external perspectives and reflect on whether your role is enhancing or impeding your well-being. Sometimes we're not always ready for constructive comments, but constructive criticism here and even some feedback, it does align with the psychological principles here of social support. And that involves seeking and receiving support and criticisms from others to improve our mental health and our coping capabilities. We already know inside a lifestyle we're so rejection resilient. We learn how to build trust and communicate better than normal relationships because all we're doing is talking and negotiating and setting up scenes and talking about consent and all these other things that go with what we do. But if we engage in these open discussions with some of our supportive friends or trusted confidants, it really can help you to navigate these whole complexities of balancing your identity inside of the lifestyle with your overall sense of self. And what's the importance of all of this balance? What am I really talking about? Chris, what are you talking about here and babbling about on for so long? Well, without maintaining a balance and trying to understand why it's so vital, I'll explain it in 3 little points. Emotionally, it helps you avoid feelings of being overwhelmed or confused. And it promotes your emotional stability and satisfaction. Mentally, it supports your health by preventing role-related stress from becoming an all-consuming thing, which can reduce your anxiety and your burnout. What about physically? This encourages your self-care and your healthy living practices. It prevents physical exhaustion and overall maybe any type of injuries or anything else that's going to come along the way with it. If you let yourself get run down, you might get sick, you might get tired all the time, you're going to become... All of these things affect our moods and our sense of self. What I want you all to understand here is the takeaway between the difference between our roles in the lifestyle and our core self just isn't an exercise in self-awareness. It's truly a pathway to a more fulfilling and really a balanced life for all of ourselves and how we are going to do these things. I know some are going to maybe scoff at this idea, but by integrating our BDSM experiences with a clear sense of who we are outside of these roles, we open up the possibility for greater personal growth and emotional harmony. And this allows us to fully engage with our interests and our relationships while maintaining that strong connection to our authentic self and who we are. So as you kind of move forward through all of this, keep in mind the importance of self-awareness and reflection in maintaining this balance. It's not about achieving perfection, about more so continuously striving to align your role with your broader identity in a way that enriches your life and your well-being. And I want to leave you all today with a question before I kind of go into my other stuff and wind everything down here to think about. How does your BDSM role impact your identity outside of scenes? I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to post that up on Spotify and you can engage there. I'm going to put it up on my FetLife profile. I'll put it up on Twitter as well. So I know this is a little bit deeper and it's a little bit unconventional inside of the things that I typically talk about, but I really think this is something that impacts a lot of people. And lately I've been getting these questions among other things that are going along inside of the community right now, but I think this was really important to talk about today. Now, I want to thank all of my new followers that have come in. I really appreciate all of the compliments you're giving me. I'm glad the show is helping you out. If you could, on Spotify, rate me 5 stars. Now, I don't know how you're going to do it if you have an Apple phone. If you have an Android phone, you go to my show where it is. You see where there's 3 little dots. You click on there. It says rate my show. If you all could rate it 5 stars, this allows me to keep the show for free for now. I haven't put any ads in here. I do, however, have a donation link up. Anything, big or small is really great. I appreciate anybody who does donate. It does help me keep the show going. I've been doing this for 2.5 years. I don't have anything behind a paywall. I really don't want to put anything there. But, if you want to support what I do, please do. If not, at the very least, please rate my show 5 stars. It allows others to find it. It allows me to get the word out. And, keep building my audience for everybody else. I do have a book out if you're interested. I haven't talked about it in a while, but maybe even since last episode, but a little bit more in depth. I do talk about, it's called Tangled Desires, the intersection between BDSM and psychology. It does read a little bit more like a psychological book, but, hey, it's my first one, so be easy on the reviews. You can find that wherever you get your regular printed books or your even ebooks is available. But yeah, let me know what you thought about this today. Did your sense of self and your role and how that all affects you? It is a lot more introspection than I typically get into, but I think it's still as important, especially for many of us that are in the lifestyle. And I think for a lot of people that dictate, I know lately too, I've been talking about differences between, or I've been a little bit more vocal about demonstrators. What I mean by a demonstrator, I don't really think there were a lot of kink educators in the lifestyle. I think there are a lot of kink demonstrators. Kink is still subjective. I know that's going to upset some people, but that's okay. I want you to hear my words. I think kink is subjective. There are some strong pillars, like, of course, trust and consent and all of these things. But all of those things look different to different people in different places around the world. So nothing can really be set in stone. It's not about a one true way argument. There are some things like, be safe, don't beat somebody, no harm, right? I think we can all agree to that. But I think everything after that starts to become trial and error. And just because one person does rope or impact one way doesn't mean that's going to be the way it is for you. So if they're saying that, I think they're a demonstrator. They're not a kink educator. There's nothing wrong with that, but you got to remember there's no governing body for what we do in the lifestyle. There's no one that, nobody just even agrees about the terminology definition of BDSM itself. Everybody's got a new term. So that's my final thoughts on that. I wanted to chuck that in because I've been getting that question all week. So there's that for you all. But let me know what you thought about the episode today. Look forward to your thoughts and comments on this and how this affects people. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay kinky.